So thank you very much for those very brilliant questions. First, I'll address the question from channels. And Professor Tomori is here, Dr. Fiona, the Director of Immunization is here, and the chairperson of the Yellow Fever campaign is here. So they are available to add more insight to some of the questions or comments that have been raised. So first and foremost, in terms of the stockpile of vaccines, there is a global stockpile of vaccines, of yellow fever vaccines, that is meant for such outbreaks, and there are vaccines also for the preventive campaigns. So Nigeria is one of 27 African countries that is high risk for yellow fever, and 5 countries in the Americas as well that is high risk for yellow fever. So this stockpile of vaccines, as of last count, it was about 6 million doses, but I'm sure that there's probably additional yellow fever vaccine doses that have been added to that. Maybe the representative of the I strategy in Geneva can provide the current numbers, but the last time I checked, we had as much as 6 million doses. And these vaccines are available for us to draw on. So anytime there's an outbreak of yellow fever in Nigeria, we're able to draw down from this stockpile. In terms of the difficulty with having a WHO reference laboratory in Nigeria, I believe Professor Tomori, and in my speech I also mentioned that we're prioritizing this, right? No matter how difficult it is to set up a laboratory, it makes no sense that with all the human and material resources we have in Nigeria that we have to go to Dakar for confirmation. Again, this is part of the rot that has taken place in the health sector over the last few decades, right? There used to be a time that we would produce yellow fever vaccines in Nigeria. Now we don't produce any vaccine in Nigeria. Again, these are some of the issues that we've had with successive governments that have not prioritized technology. And you are aware that this government has now a board that is focused on local vaccine production. As a matter of fact, Professor Tomori chairs that board that's looking at how we can, within the shortest possible time, again begin to produce vaccines in Nigeria. But that is short time, medium time to long term, right? But in terms of the laboratory in Nigeria, where we can confirm cases of yellow fever, we're looking at a timeline of 6 months. We will do whatever it takes to ensure that this is implemented within the next 6 months. Professor Tomori and the development partners have experience in doing this. The federal government, the Federal Ministry of Health, under the leadership of Professor Adewole, has prioritized the setup of this mechanism to ensure that we get a reference laboratory. At Nphcda, working with the NCDC, we feel this is something that needs to happen, and we're committed to making it happen. There will be no excuses, no reasons why Nigeria should not be confirming yellow fever cases in Nigeria. The question from Hot FM around whether the vaccination is between kids that are aged 9 months to adults that are 44 years old, whether it's sort of a range. We are very specific about that range. It's from 9 months to 44 years, right? So if you turn 44 years in June, right, that means you are still 44 years by this time, right? So 44 years is 44 years. But we're also cognizant of the fact that a lot of people don't even have their birth certificates, right? So if people are able to sort of give us an idea around what their ages are, then we're able to vaccinate. But we do have specific reasons why it is before, it's not before 9 months or after 44 years. Joseph Kadiru talked about the preventive campaign and how he has not seen anybody in his locality, even though he lives in in Niger State. So it is very possible that you are expecting that they will bring the vaccine to your doorstep, like they do with the oral polio vaccine. Now, this is an injectable vaccine, so it is done from a fixed post where qualified health workers provide the vaccines. So this is not a simple vaccine like the oral polio vaccine where anybody can be trained within a week and they will know how to drop the vaccine in the mouth of the recipient. So there's a fixed post. So you need to ask where the nearest fixed post is. But if you listen very carefully, locally they make announcements in the radios that the nearest primary healthcare center provides the vaccines. So take a good look, because Niger State is one of the states that has very massive turnout. We're really impressed with the turnout of the residents to take the yellow fever vaccine. Rabi Abdullahi talked about, from NTA, talked about the yellow fever vaccines that are given to travelers. If you've had a yellow fever vaccine, the yellow fever vaccine confers lifelong immunity. So once you've had it once, you don't need to take it again for the rest of your life. Then around the WHO, okay, you asked about the laboratory, right? I want to assure each and every one of you here that we are outraged by the situation. You could hear it very clearly from Professor Tomeri's voice. This is why it was an issue in my address. It is not acceptable. If we want to continue touting leadership in Africa, we cannot be sending our samples to Dakar. Leadership in the health sector is something that we have the resources to demonstrate. We have the capacity. All we need to do is get our act together and make sure that within the next 6 months, we brush off all the rot of the last few decades and ensure that we put everything that is necessary to ensure that the laboratories are WHO qualified as reference laboratory. There are criteria, and these criteria are not criteria that are insurmountable, right? We have the people who can be trained. We have the resources to ensure. A lot of the laboratories are already doing fantastic work, right? But how do we get our development partners to sit around the table to also conduct an exercise using people who already have information around what the key requirements are? I'll assure you that the Honorable Minister of Health is dedicated to this. A lot of our stakeholders, there are a lot of our development partners who are also interested in Nigeria having a reference laboratory. I am sure that with all the commitment that we have around the table, we will have this reference laboratory in the not too distant future. I think pretty much those were the questions. The difference between the stockpile that is kept globally to respond to outbreaks, right? And the fact that we're using this as preventive campaigns, right? We have the vaccines for the preventive campaigns. There is no shortfall. Yes, a few years ago, there was a global shortfall in yellow fever vaccines, and we're not at the point where we have reached adequacy all across countries. But for what we need in Nigeria, we have enough for the preventive campaigns. We have enough to stem the outbreak of yellow fever, right? Professor Tomori, did you have anything else to add? Dr. Fiona, Dr. Wodo, did you have anything to have? Chairman, did you have anything to add?
About the travelers.
Huh?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Somebody asked a question on the travelers' immunization for yellow fever. What is important is that you must have your yellow card. Even if you had yellow fever vaccination and you don't have your yellow fever card, you will be made to have another one. So the yellow fever card is very important. And for the lab, we are already in the next, even less than 6 months, like the ED said, the Gadua lab will soon be scaled up to a reference lab. It's a very big lab in Abuja here, It has all the equipment. We've already started training people in Dakar in collaboration with the WHO. So it will soon take off. So Nigeria is definitely on course.